The Humiliation, Stanford University, spring semester 1998. The morning sun cast long shadows across Stanford's pristine campus as Marcus Chen clutched his worn computer science textbook against his chest. At 20 years old, he had the lean build of someone who spent more time hunched over code than lifting weights, his dark hair perpetually tousled from running nervous fingers through it. The scholarship student from Oakland had never quite felt like he belonged among the manicured lawns. In limestone buildings that seemed to whisper of old money and established connections, but today was different. Today Marcus had finally worked up the courage to do something that had been eating at him for months. Victoria Sterling sat 3 rows ahead of him in Professor Williams' advanced algorithms class, her golden hair catching the lecture halls. Fluorescent lights like spun silk. She was everything Marcus wasn't. Confident, radiant. Born into the kind of privilege that made navigating college social hierarchies seem effortless. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels across California, and she drove a BMW that cost more than Marcus's family made in 2 years. Marcus had been harboring feelings for Victoria since their first semester, when she'd smiled at him after. He'd helped explain a particularly complex programming concept during study group. That smile had haunted his dreams for months, giving him hope that maybe, just maybe, someone like her could see past his thrift store clothes and generic sneakers. To the person underneath, the spring formal was only 2 weeks away. Marcus had been rehearsing his invitation speech for days. He'd written it down, memorized it, practiced it in the mirror of his tiny dorm room until his roommate complained. The plan was simple: catch Victoria after class, away from her usual crowd, ask her with all the sincerity he could muster. But as the lecture ended and students began filing out, Marcus's carefully laid plans crumbled. Victoria was surrounded by her usual entourage, sorority sisters in designer clothes, and her boyfriend Jake Morrison, the star quarterback whose jaw looked like it had been chiseled from marble. They were laughing about something, probably. Weekend plans that involved places Marcus couldn't afford to enter. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the group near the student center's main entrance. The bustling area was packed with students grabbing coffee between classes, the noise level creating a constant buzz of conversation and laughter. He told himself, this was perfect. Casual, natural, no pressure. Victoria. His voice came out, smaller than intended, barely audible over the ambient noise. She turned, her perfectly applied makeup highlighting eyes the color of spring sky. For a moment, Marcus thought he saw recognition, maybe even warmth. But then her gaze traveled down his faded jeans and up to his nervous expression, and something shifted in her features. "Oh," she said, her tone already cooling. "Marcus, right. From algorithms? Yeah, that's right." Marcus felt sweat gathering at his palms. "I was wondering if maybe you'd like to go to the spring formal with me. I know it's kind of last minute, but I thought maybe we could." The laughter that erupted from Jake Morrison cut through Marcus's words like a blade. It wasn't just Jake. Victoria's friends had turned to watch the spectacle, their expressions ranging from amusement to secondhand embarrassment. But it was Victoria's reaction that would haunt Marcus for decades to come. Her face transformed, beautiful features twisting into something cold and cruel. "Are you serious right now?" Her voice carried across the student center, causing nearby conversations to pause. "You actually think someone like me would go anywhere with scholarship? Trash like you?" The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Around them, the crowd was growing, drawn by the spectacle of public humiliation. Someone had their phone out, probably recording. Marcus felt his face burning with shame, but Victoria wasn't finished. Look at yourself," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're pathetic. What did you think was going to happen here? That I'd be impressed by your charity case sob story?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow felt more devastating than her public proclamation. "People like you don't get to dream about people like me. Know your place." Jake Morrison clapped slowly, his grin wide. "And predatory, damn babe. Remind me never to get on your bad side." Marcus stood frozen, the weight of 100 stares pressing down on him. His textbook had fallen from his numb fingers, pages fluttering in the slight breeze. He wanted to say something, anything, to salvage some dignity from this moment. But no words came. Instead, he bent to retrieve his book and walked away, each step feeling like he was wading through quicksand. Behind him, he could hear Victoria's voice, bright and cheerful again, as she returned to her friends. God, some people just don't understand reality, you know? That night, Marcus lay in his narrow dorm bed staring at the ceiling, Victoria's words echoing in his mind on an endless loop. Scholarship trash. Pathetic. Know your place. The humiliation burned in his chest like acid, but underneath it, something else was taking root. Something harder and more dangerous than shame. Determination. The climb Silicon Valley, March 2013. 15 years had transformed Marcus Chen in ways that his college self could never have imagined. The shy, stammering student had evolved into a man who commanded boardrooms with quiet intensity. At 35, he possessed the kind of lean, understated confidence that came from building something extraordinary from nothing. His dark hair was now expertly cut, his clothes tailored to perfection. But his eyes still held that familiar hunger, the drive of someone who remembered what it felt like to be dismissed. "The acquisition papers are ready for your signature," Diana Rodriguez announced as she strode into Marcus's corner office, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floors of Chen Dynamics headquarters. His business partner and CFO had been with him since the early days when they'd worked out of a cramped garage in Palo Alto. Surviving on energy drinks and the shared conviction that they were building something revolutionary, Marcus stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling heart of Silicon Valley, watching the endless stream of dreamers and innovators hurrying between glass towers that housed the world's most powerful tech companies. His own reflection stared back at him, a billionaire at 35, the founder of the most innovative cybersecurity firm in the industry. "CyberShield accepted our terms?" Coos asked, turning from the window. The acquisition would make Chen Dynamics the undisputed leader in corporate digital protection. It's a $2.8 billion deal that would send shockwaves through the tech world. Signed, sealed, and ready for the press release, Diana confirmed, setting the documents on his minimalist desk. "Timothy called this morning. He wants to discuss the IPO timeline. Says we're looking at going public by year-end if we want to ride this momentum." Timothy Hayes had been Marcus's mentor since the venture capital firm Pinnacle. Investments first took a chance on two unknown entrepreneurs with a revolutionary idea. The gruff, silver-haired investor had seen something in Marcus that others had missed, the kind of relentless determination that turned impossible dreams into billion-dollar realities. Marcus signed the acquisition papers with practiced efficiency, each stroke of his pen representing years of 18-hour days, countless rejections, and the slow, methodical building of an empire. But even as he celebrated another milestone, a familiar ache lingered in his chest. Success had brought him everything he'd thought he wanted: wealth, respect, power, yet something felt incomplete. Rebecca Walsh from TechCrunch is here. For the interview, Diana mentioned checking her tablet. She wants to discuss the human story behind Chen Dynamics. You know, the whole from scholarship student to Silicon Valley titan angle. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Learned to control his reactions over the years. To present the polished image of a confident CEO who'd always known he was destined for greatness. But certain phrases still had the power to transport him back to that spring day at Stanford, standing in the student center while laughter echoed around him. "Tell her I'll give her 20 minutes, Marcus said. And Diana, ensure the narrative stays focused on innovation and market disruption. I don't need another piece about my humble beginnings." Diana nodded, understanding the subtle warning in his tone. She'd been there during the early days when Marcus would work until dawn, driven by something more than ambition. It was as if he was trying to prove something to ghosts that only he could see. An hour later, Marcus sat across from Rebecca Walsh in the company's modern conference room, fielding questions about market strategy and technological advancement. The journalist was sharp, professional, and clearly well-prepared. But then she asked the question that always seemed to surface in these interviews. "What drives someone like you?" Rebecca leaned forward, her pen poised over her notepad. You've achieved more by 35 than most people accomplish in a lifetime. But there's something almost relentless about your success, like you're trying to prove something. What fuels that fire? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently against the table's surface. Through the conference room's glass walls, he could see his employees, brilliant minds from the world's top universities. People who now looked to him for leadership and vision. They saw him as Marcus Chen, the visionary CEO. They had no idea about the terrified scholarship student who still lived somewhere deep inside him. Success is the best response to those who doubt you, Marcus finally said, his voice steady and measured. When you come from nothing, you learn that the only validation that matters is the kind you create for yourself. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus wondered if he truly believed them. 15 years later, Victoria Sterling's voice still echoed in quiet moments, a reminder of wounds that wealth and achievement couldn't fully heal. The Twist of Fate, Chen Dynamics Headquarters, October 2023. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 15th floor of Chen Dynamics' sleek headquarters. Ethan Sterling adjusted his tie for the third time, his palms damp with nervous sweat. Despite the building's perfect climate control, at 22, he possessed his mother's striking features, the same golden hair and blue eyes, but there was something softer about him, genuine warmth that contrasted sharply with the calculating ambition that had once defined Victoria Sterling. "You've got this," he whispered to himself, clutching the leather portfolio his girlfriend Amanda had given him for luck. The junior analyst position at Chen Dynamics represented everything he'd worked toward during his finance degree at UC Berkeley. More importantly, it was his chance to finally provide the stability his mother desperately needed. Jennifer Park, company's HR director, greeted him in the reception area with a professional smile. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Jennifer. Thank you for coming in today. Mr. Chen is running a few minutes behind, but he specifically requested to conduct this interview personally." Ethan nodded, trying to hide his surprise. He'd researched Marcus Chen extensively. The legendary founder and CEO rarely involved himself in entry-level hiring. The fact that Chen wanted to meet him personally felt both thrilling and terrifying. "I have to ask," Jennifer said as they walked toward the executive conference room. "Any relation to the Sterling hotel chain? We get a lot of applicants trying to leverage family connections." Ethan's stomach tightened. "My grandfather founded Sterling Hotels, but that was a long time ago. My mother and I, we're not involved with the business anymore." It was a diplomatic way of saying that his mother's bitter divorce 3 years ago had left them with nothing. Victoria's ex-husband had been vindictive in the settlement, using expensive lawyers to ensure she walked away with minimal assets. The proud woman, who had once dismissed people as beneath her, now worked as a struggling real estate agent, barely making rent on their modest apartment. The conference room's glass walls offered a panoramic view of Silicon Valley's sprawling landscape. Ethan was admiring the vista when the door opened behind him. He turned, expecting to see the HR director returning, but instead found himself face to face with Marcus Chen himself. Recognition hit Marcus like a physical blow. The young man standing before him was unmistakably Victoria's son, the same aristocratic bone structure, the same piercing blue eyes. But where Victoria had possessed a cold, calculating beauty, this young man radiated genuine warmth. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his smile authentic rather than manipulative. "Ethan Sterling," Marcus said slowly, tasting the name. After 25 years, fate had delivered Victoria's flesh and blood directly into his hands. "Yes, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me personally. I know how busy you must be." Ethan's voice carried none of his mother's entitled edge. Instead, Marcus heard genuine gratitude and a hint of nervous energy. "Please sit down." Marcus gestured to the conference table, his mind racing. This was impossible. Of all the companies in Silicon Valley, of all the positions available, Victoria Sterling's son had walked into his office seeking employment. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. "Tell me about yourself, Ethan," Marcus said. Settling into his chair across from the young man who looked so achingly familiar, Ethan launched into his prepared presentation with practiced confidence, discussing his academic achievements, internship experience, and passion for financial analysis. But Marcus barely heard the words. Instead, he found himself studying the young man's mannerisms, searching for traces of the woman who had once humiliated him so completely. "I notice you graduated summa cum laude from Berkeley," Marcus observed. "Impressive. What drives that?" "Level of academic excellence." Ethan's expression grew more serious. "Honestly, sir, my mother sacrificed everything to put me through college. She went through a difficult divorce a few years ago and lost most of her assets. She's been working multiple jobs to support us both. I need to succeed because she deserves better than the hand life has dealt her recently." The words hit Marcus like a slap. Victoria Sterling, the woman who had once dismissed him as scholarship trash, was now struggling financially. Her son was sitting in Marcus's office, unknowingly begging for a job from the very man his mother had once called pathetic. "What does your mother do now?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Real estate," Ethan replied, his jaw tightening slightly. "It's been tough since the market downturn. She's too proud to ask for help, but I know she's struggling. That's why this opportunity means everything to me. I want to build something stable, something that can give her the security she deserves." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying. The earnest young man across from him, here was his chance for the ultimate revenge. Could destroy Victoria Sterling's son with a few carefully chosen words, ensuring that the humiliation she had inflicted on him 25 years ago would come full circle. He could watch this polite, well-meaning young man crumbled the same way he had crumbled in that student center. But looking at Ethan, Sterling really looking at him, Marcus saw something unexpected. This wasn't the entitled, cruel person his mother had been. This was someone who genuinely cared about family, who understood struggle, who possessed the kind of character that Marcus had once hoped to find in Victoria herself. "Your references are impressive," Marcus said finally. "Professor Martinez speaks very highly of your analytical skills." He was an incredible mentor," Ethan replied. "He taught me that numbers tell stories, but you have to understand the human element behind the data to make truly informed decisions." Marcus nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in his mind. But it wasn't the plan for revenge he might have expected. Instead, he found himself facing a choice that would define not just Ethan's future, but his own character. "We'll be in touch," Marcus said, standing to conclude the interview. "Thank you for your time today, Ethan." As the young man left, Marcus remained in the conference room, staring out at the city he had conquered. In his hands, he held the power to complete a circle of pain that had begun 25 years ago. The question was, what kind of man had he truly become? The decision 1 week later, various locations. Marcus Chen hadn't slept properly in a week. He sat in his home office at 3 a.m., nursing his third cup of coffee while staring at Ethan Sterling's resume on his laptop screen. The young man's credentials were impeccable, top of his class, stellar recommendations, obvious intelligence, and work ethic. Under normal circumstances, hiring him would be a no-brainer. But nothing about this situation was normal. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Grace. "Still up? Saw your office lights from my apartment. You're obsessing again, aren't you?" Grace lived in the building across the street, close enough to worry about her older brother's workaholic tendencies. As a high school teacher in East Palo Alto, she had inherited their parents' sense of compassion, something Marcus sometimes wondered if he'd lost along his climb to the top. Instead of responding to Grace, Marcus opened his laptop and began researching. If he was going to make this decision, he needed to understand exactly what Victoria Sterling's life looked like now. What he discovered surprised him. Victoria Sterling Blackwood. She'd kept her ex-husband's name for professional reasons, was indeed struggling. Her real estate license showed minimal sales over the past 2 years. Public records revealed she was behind on rent for a modest 2-bedroom apartment in San Mateo, far cry from the luxury she'd once known. Her LinkedIn profile showed a woman trying desperately to maintain a professional facade, while her world crumbled around her. But it was the community college class roster that gave Marcus's pause. Victoria was enrolled in evening courses, accounting, business management, computer literacy. At 43, she was trying to rebuild her life from scratch, learning skills she'd never needed when wealth was her birthright. The next morning, Marcus found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, questioning his own motives. He drove to the community center in East Oakland, where he volunteered once a month, teaching coding to underprivileged kids. The one place where Marcus Chen, the billionaire CEO, didn't exist? Here, he was just Marcus, a guy who remembered what it felt like to have nothing. Father Miguel Santos was tending to the center's small garden when Marcus arrived unexpectedly. The elderly priest had known Marcus since his volunteer work began 5 years ago, and had a way of seeing through the polished exterior to the man underneath. "You look troubled, my friend," Father Miguel observed, not looking up from his tomato plants. "Something weighing on your heart?" Marcus found himself telling the priest everything. The college humiliation, Ethan's interview, the impossible choice he now faced. Father Miguel listened without judgment, occasionally nodding as he worked. "So you hold this young man's future in your hands," the priest said finally. "And through him, perhaps his mother's redemption as well." "She doesn't deserve redemption," Marcus said, the words coming out harsher than intended. "You didn't hear what she said to me, Miguel, the way she looked at me like I was nothing." "No," the priest agreed. "But perhaps the question isn't what she deserves. Perhaps it's about who you choose to be." Meanwhile, across the Bay Area, Victoria Sterling sat in her small apartment, watching Ethan pace nervously while waiting for news from Chen Dynamics. Her son had been electric with excitement after the interview, convinced he'd made a good impression on the legendary CEO. "Mom, stop looking so worried," Ethan said, settling beside her on the second-hand couch. "I can feel your anxiety from—" Here, Victoria managed a weak smile. The truth was, she was terrified. This job represented their lifeline. Without it, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the pretense that everything was fine. The evening classes were eating into her already limited time for real estate showings, but she knew. She needed new skills to survive in a world that had changed dramatically since her privileged youth. "I just want the best for you," she said softly. "You've worked so hard, sacrificed so much because of my mistakes." "Your mistakes?" Ethan looked genuinely confused. "Mom, you gave up everything to put me through college after the divorce."
You're
"The strongest person I know." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Her son's faith in her was both a blessing and a burden. He saw her through the lens of love, not knowing about the entitled, cruel person she'd once been. The divorce had been devastating, but it had also forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, truths she was still trying to reconcile. Back at Chen Dynamics, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He called his head of security, David Kim, and asked for a comprehensive background check on Victoria Sterling Blackwood. Not for revenge, but for understanding. The report that arrived 2 days later painted a picture of a woman in transition. Yes, she was. Struggling financially, but she was also volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other divorced women navigate their new realities. Her neighbors described her as quiet but kind, always willing to help elderly Mrs. Patterson with groceries or watch the Wilson kids when their parents worked late. Diana Rodriguez found Marcus in his office that evening, staring at the background. "Report. You're going to hire him, aren't you?" she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've known you for 15 years, and despite what you sometimes think, you're not a cruel person. You're calculating, ambitious, sometimes ruthless in business, but not cruel." Marcus looked at his oldest friend and business partner. "She destroyed me, Diana, in front of everyone. Made me feel like I was nothing. Look at you now," Diana replied gently. "You're one of the most successful people in the world. Maybe it's time to let that angry college kid finally rest." That night, Marcus sat in his study, a glass of wine untouched beside him. Tomorrow, he would call Ethan Sterling with his decision. The young man was waiting, his mother was struggling, and Marcus held their future in his hands. For the first time in 25 years, Marcus Chen had to decide who he truly wanted to be. The redemption 2 weeks later, Chen Dynamics and beyond. A phone call came on a Tuesday morning while Ethan was helping his mother organize client files in their cramped apartment. Victoria watched her son's face transform as he listened to the voice on the other end, his expression shifting from nervous anticipation to pure joy. "Yes, sir. Yes, I understand." Thank you so much, Mr. Chen. I won't let you down. Ethan hung up, staring at the phone in disbelief before letting out a whoop of celebration. Mom, I got it. I got the job. Victoria felt her knees go weak with relief. The position came with a salary that would allow them to move to a better apartment, help her finish her evening classes, and finally provide the stability they'd been desperately seeking. She hugged her son tightly, tears streaming down her face. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. You've worked so hard for this. What Victoria didn't know was that Marcus Chen had spent the past week crafting something far more elaborate than a simple job offer. Ethan would start as a junior analyst, but Marcus had also arranged for an accelerated mentorship program, advanced training opportunities, and a clear path for rapid advancement. The young man would earn his success, but Marcus intended to ensure he had every tool necessary to achieve it. On Ethan's first day, Marcus made an unexpected decision. Instead of maintaining his usual CEO distance, he personally welcomed the new hire to the team during the morning meeting. I want everyone to meet Ethan Sterling, Marcus announced to the gathered analysts and managers. He'll be joining our financial analysis team, and I have a feeling he's going to bring some fresh perspectives to our work. David Kim, Marcus's head of security, approached his boss after the meeting. Sir, there's something you should know. We've been monitoring social media as part of our standard background protocols. Ethan posted about getting the job, and his mother shared the post. Victoria Sterling Blackwood. Marcus's heart rate quickened. What did she say? She congratulated him and mentioned being grateful to the generous CEO who saw potential in her son. But sir, ... double quotes. David hesitated. She also posted a photo from his college graduation. I ran facial recognition on some of the older images in her social media history. Marcus already knew what David was going to say. It's her, isn't it? From Stanford. I remember you mentioning a Victoria Sterling once years ago. Marcus nodded slowly. After all these years, fate was forcing a final confrontation that evening. Marcus did something that surprised even himself. He drove to Victoria's apartment building, a modest complex in San Mateo that spoke of reduced circumstances but maintained dignity. He sat in his Tesla for 20 minutes, gathering courage he hadn't needed since he was 20 years old. Victoria answered the door in work, clothes a simple blouse and slacks that had seen better days but were carefully maintained. Years had been kind to her natural beauty, but there were lines around her eyes that spoke of worry and struggle. When she saw Marcus, her face went completely white. Hello, Victoria, Marcus said quietly. She gripped the doorframe for support, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus? Marcus Chen? Oh my God. May I come in? I think we need to talk. Victoria's living room was small but clean, decorated with photos of Ethan's achievements and a few pieces of furniture that had clearly been expensive. Once but now seemed out of place in the modest space. She sat on the edge of her couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. You hired my son, she said, her voice shaking. You hired Ethan, knowing who I am. Yes, why? The word came out broken. It's filled with 25 years of guilt that Marcus was only now realizing she'd been carrying. Marcus looked at this woman who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. The entitled, cruel college student had been replaced by someone who understood loss, who had learned humility through genuine hardship. Because he's brilliant and hardworking, and he deserves the opportunity, Marcus said simply. And because I've learned that holding on to anger only poisons the person carrying it. Victoria's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she covered it with her hands. I was so horrible to you, so cruel. I think about that day constantly, Marcus, the person I was then. I'm so ashamed. We were kids, Victoria. Stupid, cruel kids who thought the world was a certain way. No, she said firmly, looking up at him through her tears. You were never cruel. Even then, you were kind and genuine. I was the one who was ugly inside. The divorce, losing everything. It forced me to see who I really was, and I hated what I saw. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a weight he'd carried for decades finally beginning to lift. Your son is a good man. Loves you deeply. Talks about your strength and sacrifice. You raised someone with real character, Victoria. That says something about who you've become. He doesn't know, she whispered. About how I treated you, about the person I used to be. He sees me through such loving eyes. And maybe that's who you really are now, Marcus suggested. Maybe we don't have to be defined by our worst moments. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two middle-aged people finally letting go of wounds that had shaped them for far too long. What happens now? Victoria asked. Now your son excels at his job because he's talented and works hard. Has no idea about our history, and it should stay that way. This is his story, not ours. As Marcus stood to leave, Victoria touched his arm gently. Thank you for giving him this chance. For showing me what grace looks like. Marcus smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Take care of yourself, Victoria, and be proud of the man you raised. He's going to do great things. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the Chen Dynamics break room, watching Ethan Sterling animatedly explain a new market analysis to his colleagues. The young man had indeed proven himself brilliant, his insights already contributing to major strategic decisions. More importantly, he brought a warmth and humanity to the workplace that reminded everyone why they'd chosen this company. Diana Rodriguez joined Marcus by the coffee machine. No regrets. Marcus shook his head, watching Ethan laugh at something a coworker had said. None at all. Turns out the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming the person you were meant to be. Outside, the California sun was setting over Silicon Valley, casting long shadows that gradually gave way to the promise of a new day. And for the first time in 25 years, Marcus Chen was truly at peace with the man staring back at him in the reflection.